of course, is the mincha offering. The Torah opens up in chapter 2, verse 1. V'nefesh tiki takriv korban mincha laHashem solet yeh korbano v'yatzak aleh shemen v'natan aleh levona. So we have the ingredients for the mincha offering. First of all, let us say, one of the great later scholars, Rav David Hoffman, explains that we're dealing with the mincha offering. We're dealing with the very product that grows on the ground, the goodness that God has given you. And the three staple products that God has given the Jewish people and the world, essentially, are dagan, tirosh, and yitzar. The wheat product, the grain product, tirosh, the wine, and yitzar. All three of them are genuinely used for the mincha offering, although here, the nisuch hayayin is not mentioned really here throughout the chapter, to my recollection. It's not mentioned here. It's mentioned in other places in the Torah. But God has given you a blessing. He's allowed you to grow the grain, to grow in the vine and oil. Now you're going to give back, if you want. The Torah opens up with v'nefesh ki takriv, when you're going to bring a korban. So we're learning here about a nidava, a volunteer offering by definition. My dear friends, so you want to give back to Hashem, and you're bringing now fine flour, the first of 5 different types of meal offerings. But this is the only time of all the korbanot section in the book of Vayikra where the Torah uses the word v'nefesh. Rashi brings us educationally this point, which is mentioned in the Gemara Masechet Menachot. Why did the Torah choose the meal offering to say when a soul is bringing the meal offering? I'm going to talk with my economist sitting right here, Mr. David Adler. Mr. Adler, how expensive is a meal offering in your very economic... Cheap. What did you say? Cheap. Use the word inexpensive, please.
Oh, very inexpensive.
Oh, there you go. It's much less than a cow. And a goat. And a goat. And it's much less than a bird.
For sure.
There you go. Our economist says, this guy that's bringing the meal offering, you know what it is? He's a poor person. He doesn't have the financial ability to bring a bird, and certainly not bringing an animal. Again, we're talking about nidava, volunteering. And therefore, if he brings it, his gift, from the meal offering, it's as if he's sacrificing his nefesh, sacrificing himself. God has so much appreciation. When a poor person brings with the bare minimum what he has, wow, God rises him up, that he's called the nefesh, that he's basically sacrificing himself. Do you follow why the Torah now uses the word v'nefesh ki takriv? Because this is all he has. A few shekels to bring this offering. Now note that all of the minachot, including this one, number 1, are all going to be baked. They're all going to be baked after they're mixed with oil and so on and so forth. Before we do the kmitzah, we'll mention kmitzah in the next pasuk. Kmitzah is taking that scoop of the hand. Only this is not going to be baked. In other words, the solet is not baked before the kmitzah, only afterwards apparently. If you want to, you can bake it and eat it thereafter. So, we have the korban mincha. The Torah says you're going to pour oil on it. Obviously, the shemen we're talking about is shemen zayit. And then we're going to be learning about the levona, this very important spice that you said it's called in Latin frankincense. And we mentioned this spice is very, very important spice. There's even like a ministerial office on the Temple Mount called Lishkat HaLevona. We went to the warehouse manager, Reuven Cohen, the other day, and we asked him, well, how much do you utilize? How much do you exhaust? How much levona a year? And he says approximately 280 kilos of levona a year. That's quite a sum, isn't it? And now you understand why there's an area to store all the levona, because we're using it for the mincha offering. Number 2, we're using the levona for the ketoret, the incense offering, and we're using it, number 3, on the on the shulchan, inside this kli called the bazich, which we will pour livona on it as well. So now, therefore, that explains why there's such a lishka, an area on the Temple Mount for storing this livona. And a Jew that wants to volunteer to bring a mincha offering, he'll bring it inside a kli, a vessel, that by definition is now made holy. He will yatzakala Hashem, and he will put oil on it, and livona, and then it goes to the Kohen. Who is the only one that can bring it to the Mizbeach? As it states in the next pasuk, let's read it, verse 2. Ve'viah el bnei Aaron. After he brings the raw materials, he now can bring it to the Kohanim. V'kamatz misham elokim. So the Kohen will take a scoop of 3 fingers worth of this flour, or the baked product. Misolta mishamna, what's mixed from the solet, the fine flour, and the oil. And now, what does the Kohen do? Viktir a Kohen et askarata mizbecha. The Kohen now will go to the mizbeach, which is on top. Which mizbeach, obviously, we're talking about? Is it clear to everyone? Which mizbeach, which altar are we talking about? The outside one, made out of? Brass. In Hebrew? Nechoshet. Right? The one that we bring all the animal offerings atop of them, correct? So he's going to bring it to the altar, okay? The altar, and what will he do? He will burn it, viktir. How will he do it? First, like I said to you orally, he will move the levona to the side of the kli, takes a kometz of the mincha, and then he puts the levona on the kometz, and then he goes up to the altar for the sprinkling on the mizbeach. Well, there's a lot of flour that wasn't sprinkled. Only a kometz was taken. Okay? By the way, did we say the quantity? What does the oral Torah say regarding the quantity? We're talking about 1/10 of an ephah. That is quite a lot. Could be certain, like a few liters of that. So there's plenty of sola that's left over. Who shall it be for? Let's read it. First, what's being burnt on the mizbeach is to the will of God. Yesterday we explained the term the Torah uses for God accepting a korban. What is it written? Ishei, a fire of reach, nichoach lashem. It's done for the sake of God. Reach nichoach lashem. Do you see where I'm reading the end of verse 2? Yeah. And that's meaning it's being accepted. What's going to be left over? What's the term the Torah uses for leftover? Who found it? Hano. Very good. Vanoteret. Hey, mi yoter gadol. What is the word yoter?
More.
Very good. So that's the root of this word. Do you see that, Moshe? Vanoteret min mincha. Follow the Hebrew. What's left over, verse 3, from the mincha, li'aronu levanav. Okay, I don't want to use the word kickbacks, but these are the gifts that are for the Kohanim. Remember, the Kohanim do not have property, land in Israel in order to generate revenues. Who is their nachala? God. So they get many different gifts. One of the gifts is, one of the 24 gifts to a Kohen is the leftovers of the mincha offering. How holy is it? Kodesh Kadashim Me'ishei Hashem. It's so holy, can only be eaten in the area on top of the Temple Mount, and so on and so forth. What did you want to say, Mr. Wiederman?
I just have a very, very stupid question. So,
We'll decide.
In the Tanakh and also in modern spoken Hebrew, the prefix with containing just a mem and also the word min, mem nun sofit, they both mean from. Is there a difference between the two, or is it just
mem or
mem nun, the word min, or just putting mem before?
So no, that means the same thing. Either it's short, the prefix mem, or min as a word. That's correct. It's the same meaning. It's the same meaning. I don't know. By the way, the Gemara will explain that when the Kohanim will be eating the mincha offering, they can even recite a bracha. Asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu le'echol mincha. Okay? That's sourced in the Rambam brings it, that they would recite a bracha by eating this mincha offering. Here in the Beit HaMikdash, we're about to learn, we'll get to it in a few moments, we'll talk about the chametz matter. David?
One question. So, for the mincha offering, the kohanim, they get also, like, they get a pot. But why not from the other offerings, from the birds or from the goats?
So we didn't say no, but in Perek Aleph we learned about the Olah offering. And what is...
completely burnt.
That's right. No one gets anything. That's something else. We'll learn about the Shlamim offering, and then you'll see and understand that the Kohanim will get a part, the owners will get a part. But right now, this is burnt on the Mizbeach. Let's now go to the names or the types of the other mincha offerings. Okay? The other mincha offerings, again, all of them will require pouring oil, mixing it with the oil. All will have to come from fine flour, except for the one that's baked in the oven, which is our next one. Look at verse 4, Pasuk Daled. V'chi takriv korban mincha. When you want to bring, again, we're talking about the nidava, ma'afei tanur, namely, a product that's going to be baked, tanur, in the oven. Solet chalot. Has to be made of fine flour, but in one form, Yossi, chalot. And now Yossi's question, does that mean chametz? And now we're going to read the next word. And the next word is matzot. So it's matzot as far as what is concerned? I'm asking my question again. It's matzot as far as what is concerned. Which halacha? That it's not leavened. And it's chalot in as far as what? The form. The form. It's in the form of a challah. And it's matzah, meaning from the time that they poured oil onto it, make sure no water is there, and they got it into the oven as quick as possible. So it's chalot matzot bilulot mixed with shemen. That's number 2. So you should know that every mincha, all 5 types, except for the mafet tenor, here we don't learn about pouring shemen. There's no giving from shemen into the kli. Rather, it's just mixed with shemen. And as far as number 3 is concerned, rikikei matzot, those are the wafers. It seems that in the rikikei matzot, there was no oil in the dough whatsoever. Only they would shmear, mishuchim bashamen. Limshoach is like on top of it, to smear the oil on. So there are different properties, different halachot regarding the different of the 5 types. Let's go to number 4. And now we're using a frying pan. Pasuk, follow the reading. V'im, remember, we're talking about the volunteer. V'im mincha lamachavat korbanecha. If your korban is a mincha to be brought on a flat pan, okay, that's how you decided, you made it holy, you said it's upon me to bring a mincha on a machavat, that's your preference. And there was a vessel in the Beit HaMikdash that they would bake or fry a mincha with a high fire, and the oil would be bubbling, and the kli is not a deep kli, rather it would be more flat, and the oil would be on top, and the mincha would turn out very hard. The property of this type of frying would turn the fried product to be quite hard, Rashi says, because the fact that the oil is so high, the fire would burn the oil and that would harden this mincha. All of these usually have 3 different gifts of oil. Yitzika, letzeket means to pour. What is the name of the kli that you put into your soup to take out soup? It's called a matzeket. Can you repeat that? Matzeket. For litzok, to pour. Okay? So there would be, number 1, yitzika, pouring concrete. We use the same word, yitzika. When are you doing yitzika? When are you pouring concrete? Okay, we talk about that as well. Baton, yitzikat baton, right? Okay. So there would be yitzika. That's number one. Get oil number two, bilila, mixing it together, and then putting shemen into the kli before the actual making. Those are three types of giving of oil. Patoto tapitim, verse 6, I'm sorry. V'yatzakta ala shemen. Ptitim. What is ptita? What is ptitim? They're cut into pieces. They're broken into pieces. In fact, if you wanted to go to the supermarket today and buy some sort of pasta that has these little pieces, they're called pit. Have you saw that? They're called petit. Yesterday was called ptitim, and it was mizonot. Okay, very good. Because you should know, they make a ptitim in the form of rice, but it's ptitim. It's mizonot. You have to know. Sometimes they make it in the form of rice. Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's okay.
But it's still mizonot. What's the nafkamina? Rice is also mizonot.
Yeah, right.
So what's the nafkamina? The after bracha. Yeah. What's the after bracha for orez for rice?
Amen.
What? What's the after bracha for rice?
I'm sorry, Borei Nefashot.
No, main shalosh.
After rice?
No, Borei Nefashot.
It's main shalosh.
It's not.
Hirsch, would you please resolve the argument here?
So on which food are we talking about specifically?
Rice. What is the after bracha for rice? There you go.
No. It's simple. We start in Rav Weinberg's shiur. Did you not pay attention?
Yes, I just.
Can I?
It's not a grain from the ground. It's not pastry. It's not bread. It's not. It's a special kind of. It's
Tov.
It's cork.
Hirsch, that's enough. Isn't it great and fun to learn Torah with this group? It's fantastic. I've never had a group like this before. Okay, gentlemen, mincha offering number 5. Pasuk Zayin, V'im mincha marcheshet. It's an interesting word because marcheshet is a deep kli, and it causes like the bubbling of the oil. Okay, that's how Rashi explains. It was a vessel in the Beit HaMikdash that was deep, and because it's so deep, the accumulation of the oil there is so much that the fire can't really burn the oil, and therefore the mincha is like bubbling. It's like bubbling. Anything that is bubbling is called rochesh u'mina'anea. Which English word did they choose to give to the word marcheshet here? Huh?
It just says a meal offering in Japan. There's no name for the offering itself.
No?
It's
Okay.
just a meal offering
But did you understand what I'm trying to explain? It was like bubbling. It's like moving. The oil is bubbling and moving. And that's the 5th one, that it's fried like in deep. It's like a deep fry. It's a deep pot with a lot of oil. Because of the quantity of oil, the fire doesn't control it. It's just bubbling, but it's making a very interesting type of fried baked product here. All of this, gentlemen, pasuk chet ve'veitata mincha sheyaseh me'el el Hashem. It's for the sake of God. V'kriva lakohen. You're going to bring it to the kohen. V'gisha, the kohen will approach the mizbeach. We mentioned, we're talking about the southwest corner. That's where it's mentioned later on in chapter 6, next parsha. That'll be the southwest corner of the mizbeach. Ve'yirim hakohen min haminchat askarata. When the kohen gets up on top, he will lift it up. Ve'yiktira mizbecha, and he'll burn it on the mizbeach. So we've briefly understood 5 different types of menachot. One more time. Menachot. Now, some halachot of it. Pasuk Yud. Vanoteret min hamincha. What's left over? Le'aron ulvanav. It's one of the gifts to the kohen that's working that day in the Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan. Kodesh Kadashim Meishen, it's very holy. He just can't even eat it even anywhere on the Temple Mount until a certain area. He can only eat these leftovers of these of the wheat products. What else? Now let's talk about chametz. Kol mincha, okay? Kol mincha asher takrivu laHashem. Any mincha that you're going to sacrifice to God, bring to God. Okay. Number 1, lo te'aseh chametz. Prohibition number 2. Kichol seor, seor is an agent that causes other products to become leavened. Chametz is something already leavened. Seor is an agent like yeast or something like that that causes other things to rise and become leavened. Kichol seor v'chol devash lo taktiru mimenu ishel Hashem. So here we have several prohibitions. The prohibition of isur chametz, seor as well. And we have the prohibition of devash. We're not allowed to burn on the mizbech. Before we get to the byproducts of this and some of the details, Ravid wanted to raise a point or question.
I read it's called Yetzer Hara.
The Yetzer Hara.
Yes.
No, he's saying the nickname of seor in Chazal is metaphorized to the Yetzer Hara. And I'd like to talk about that right now, if you allow me. Oh, you want to say something?
Yeah, I read it's a symbol of evil tendency.
Very good. Let's now try to understand this matter. I learned from one of our great rabbis from Merkaz Harav, Rabbi Hanan Porat, one of the builders of Gush Etzion, by the way, in righteous blessed memory, was a tremendous Tanakh teacher. He would explain the following, this matter. And I think this will be a major theme of understanding about sacrifices in general and menachot in particular. When we study korbanot, we, in our generation, it's quite far distant from us, because we're not in a position that we visualized the Beit HaMikdash. We don't have it in our time yet. We hope speedily in our days it'll be built and will be part of our lives. And therefore there are a lot of secrets that are not known to us. And let us, out of fear of heaven, out of fear of God, to approach to understand some of the matters. And I want to open up with what Ravid mentioned. Okay, in the back of my sefer, put up by the Mossad Rav Kook edition, I have Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch, Reb Zachia Levi, was the 12 or 1300s in Spain, if I'm not mistaken, was the great scholar that authored the 613 mitzvot according to each what? Portion of the week.
Yes.
Okay, Sefer HaChinuch, where's in the back of you? Can you show them? Is it in the back of you, Sefer HaChinuch?
It's there. It's going to be here somewhere.
Where do you see it, Thomas?
On the left side, in front of you.
We have several editions.
All the way at the very corner.
Over here. It's by me.
Yeah.
Okay? It's very special to learn. Every Shabbat you can learn one mitzvah or two mitzvot. It's divided into positive mitzvot and negative mitzvot. So I have Sefer Chinuch at the end of this particular Chumash. I want to read to you what the Sefer Chinuch explains in regards to seor, leavening or chametz, regarding these sacrifices. Since the seor raises the dough, it's an agent that causes the leavening of the dough, get away from it. Like King Solomon says in the book of Proverbs and Mishlei, Ki to'avat Hashem kol gova lev. The abomination of God is someone whose heart is haughty, uplifted. Indeed, the seor is an agent, Rav Hanan Porat explains based on Chazal, that causes the dough to be leavened. It swells it above and beyond its natural dimension. And what does this illustrate? It illustrates the yetzer, the inclination that I want to be proud of myself, that I want to show off of myself. And as if my heart is swelling and my mind is swelling above and beyond. In contrast to that, we have a bread called matzah. The matzah, all of these 5 menachot are really matzah. Why? Because they're expressing the korban of a poor person. Remember, we opened up. The opening word of this chapter is V'nefesh. And what did we explain in the name of Rashi? That if this is the guy that's bringing what he has, it's as if he's sacrificing his own self, his own soul.
It's about humility.
It's about humility. In other words, this korban has to be simplistic, has to represent humility, but also quickness, above time. It has to be put into the oven with how many minutes? 18 minutes. So that we don't waste time. 18 minutes will turn it into chametz. That's a very important idea that the Sefer Chinuch writes. Number 2, regarding the mitzvah of eating matzah on the holiday of Pesach, do you know that matzah is called actually in the Torah lechem oni, the bread of the poor. Another meaning, the bread of affliction, but let's go about the bread of the poor. The bread of the poor is indicative of the redemption. Why? A poor guy doesn't have anything. He just has himself. And time and delicacies are more representing the material, physical world. But on the night of Passover, when we want to not only metaphorize about the redemption, we want to live it and perform mitzvot that are representing the redemption, that represents the divine world. We now imagine, like the Kohen Gadol, that's serving in the Beit HaMikdash with his gold clothing, and on Yom Kippur his white clothing. When he goes inside with the very white clothing, very simple clothing, nothing illustrious, nothing full of glory, simple. That's what the matzah is about. Connecting to God simplistically. That's what the menachot are about. So we have now a very important foundation, that when we deal with the Kodesh, when we deal with the Beit HaMikdash, and we deal with the meal offerings, we are to, as Rav Hanan Part explains, to shake away from ourselves different types of a pose of self-importance, any other pose of my head is swelling, my pride, my haughtiness. Just stand before the Almighty, the source of all fear in the world, with quickness, with alertness, with humility, just like the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur wears white, simple clothing. So that's an important matter, that when we're coming to deal with a mincha offering, we're not allowed to turn it into chametz or seor. Before God, there's no room for haughtiness. Because when you put the leavening agent, what happens to the dough? We want you to be natural before God, without any of these chemical involvements of gloating us up and blowing us up and so on and so forth. Let's now go to the second element. After we learned about the prohibition of chametz regarding the mincha, what's the problem? Why is it invalid to use a little devash? What's the matter? Don't you want to sweeten the mincha offering by putting a little devash inside the mincha? Or it says ketoret as well. Do you notice that? Lo taktiru mimenu ishel Hashem. It's not only regarding the mincha offering, Thomas. It's also regarding we're not allowed to put devash in the ketoret. You and I say it every day. When we read the ketoret section, the end of shacharit, or if you're a big tzaddik, like, what's his name over here on the table? I'm not going to mention his name. He even reads the ketoret off. He reads the ketoret before the psukei de zimra. You always need a good Sfardi in the group to be so righteous like them, right? What's wrong? Why does God, in our human understanding, say that eat in the ketoret or the mincha, you can't use honey? Gentlemen, to sense and understand what honey is, we all realize that honey is something enjoyable, something so pleasant, something so savory and sweet to our taste buds. But that is the lacking. That's the problem. Oneg, you want to have enjoyment? You want to have pleasantry? In and of itself, is it invalid? Yes or no in our lives?
No.
It's not invalid. I'm asking you again. To have something so pleasant, so sweet, is that invalid in our lives? No. No, on the opposite. What does Isaiah say regarding Shabbat? Az titanei gal Hashem. Then you shall have oneg for the sake of God. You see the guy sitting opposite you? Do you know the sweeties that he buys for Shabbos? I'm not going to talk about him right now in front of everyone. He enjoys sweet things. He enjoys pleasant things. Is it invalid, yes or no? Answer for him. Of course it's not invalid. So what's the problem? When we're talking about Avodat Hashem, when we're learning about the service of God, I want to share with you the words of the great Ramchal, the Mesilat Yesharim. He says the following: if you really want to serve Hashem, if you want to visualize the pleasantry of God and visit in His shrine and receive reward for the world to come, then we can't say that you have bad intention, that you want to get reward for the world to come. However, you should know, if you're going to be serving God just to get reward for yourself, in the end, you're going to be serving yourself. If you're going to be serving God just to get reward for yourself, then you're doing it basically for your own service. What, though, is a more lofty, higher level of serving Hashem that we find amongst the Hasidim, the saints of Israel, that all their toiling and laboring and efforts is they're doing only Leman Shemo, on behalf of His name, Bi'ava, with love, to heighten godliness in the world. Amen. In the very, very fine language of the Rambam, in the laws of Tshuva. Has anyone here opened up ever the Rambam, the laws of Tshuva? Which book does it appear in?
It's in the first book.
Very good, the book of knowledge, Sefer HaMadah. There, in the laws of Tshuva, the Rambam writes in chapter 10, paragraph 2, someone that's serving God out of love, he's going to occupy himself with Torah, with mitzvot. He's going to go in the path of wisdom, not for anything, not for a kickback, not for a salary, and not because he fears evil either, and not in order to inherit something that's good, rather because it's the truth. Because it's the truth, and then goodness will come to him in the end, in any event. But he's doing it because it's true. This, Rav Hanan Porat explains, is the fundamental point of Dvash. The fundamental point that we're not allowed to use Dvash, not for the Ketoret offering and not for the Mincha offering. Rav Kook explains, if you want to get a more lofty level of serving God, it has to be in honor of the Master of the world, without any enjoyment to yourself whatsoever. What is honey? Well, by the way, when we say honey in the Torah, we don't mean bee honey. We mean the sweetness of fruit. The sweetness of fruit. I'm not committing myself right now to dates, honey. We'll talk about that in Korban Rashid if there's going to be time. Sweetness of fruits called honey is really denoting pleasure.
Like fried?
Pleasure, sweetness, no. There's room for that in our lives. But to be bringing here in the Beit HaMikdash, the most holy place to be serving God, we want to have more idealistic thinking. We want to have more lofty ideas of serving Hashem. So therefore, when we deal with the Ketoret, and we're dealing with the Mincha offerings, if you put in Dvash, Pisala is the wording of the Mishnah we have in the Ketoret. Pasalota. You invalidated it. You made it pasul, you invalidated it. When we're dealing with a lofty level of Mincha offerings and Ketoret offerings, we know that there's no room for Seor and Dvash. Why? God said so. In addition to why God said so, that's Bar Kapara in the Ketoret part. Bar Kapara says, right? We read it. It says in our Siddur, Tani Bar Kapara. Ilo ayanotem bar kortov shel dvash. Had he put in just a little amount of dvash, ein adam yachol la'amod mipnei reicha. You couldn't even tolerate the great scent of it. As lama ein marvin badvash. So why don't we really put in dvash into this Torah concoction? Mipnei shaTorah amra, because the Torah said so. Ki chol seor v'chol dvash Lo taktiru mimenu ishel Hashem. The Torah says so, and therefore we don't do it. My dear friends, when we're coming closer to God in the Holy Beit HaMikdash, or like on the night of Pesach, through nature we serve God. To move away from haughtiness, and also to stay away from delicacies. Ketoret and the Mincha is a straight way to serving Hashem. Except, as the Torah says, we're ending our shur with verse 12. Korban Reshit. That's the code word for something I'm going to ask you what it is. If it's a Korban Reshit, then you're allowed to use what? Chametz. And you're allowed to use Devash. Let's read the pasuk. Korban Reshit, the Torah says in verse 12, Takrivu otam l'Hashem. Yeah, bring it to God. Has chametz? Yes. Is it dvash? Yes. But v'el hamizbeach lo ya'alu l'reach nichoach. Rashi, in the name of Chazal. Korban Reshit is talking about the holiday of Shavuot. I'm hinting to you something. It's not peace and love. I'm hinting something. On the holiday of Shavuot, we have a special public sacrifice called Korban Shtei Halechem. From the new wheat that was just harvested, it's a bikurim as well. We bring a new offering, 2 bread offering, and it is chametz. But don't put it on the mizbeach. Never chametz goes on the mizbeach. But this korban, 2 bread loaf offering, which will permit you to now use the new crop all over the country, if I'm not mistaken, that you can do. Furthermore, what else is from Dvash? Bikurim. Bikurim is the gift to the Kohanim from the what?
The first fruits.
Of the how many fruits?
The 7.
Of the 7 ripened fruits of the land of Israel. That we're going to bring as a gift to the Beit HaMikdash. And that's Dvash. Because it has tamarim, like you said. It has te'inim, it has dates, and it has figs. That's called Dvash. So those are the only 2 exceptions. However, both of them do not go on top of the Mizbeach. With this, we ended our shur. Until tomorrow. Either be here or be a square. Shalom.